Hello, everybody, and welcome in to another episode of the Couch GMs podcast. It is Thursday, August 22nd, 2024. I'm your host, George Kerth, joined by the one and only Cody Roadcap. Cody, I'm usually wearing green. You're wearing blue?
Oh, you called it out. Throwback.
Oh, man.
First ever edition Couch GMs merch that was never released to the public.
That's going to have to be released soon, I'm thinking.
Yeah, drop a comment if you want a Couch GM shirt. Maybe I'll send one for free. Maybe.
Hey, we're giving out free merch as we get ready for the NFL season. I like it. Get the fans hyped for football, get the fans hyped for the podcast as we move forward with a lot of fun stuff happening this year, but we'll get to that as we get closer to the season. In the meantime, follow us, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok at the Couch GMs. As always, send us a DM with your questions. We actually have a fan question in the show this week. More of that coming as well. Cody, let's just jump right in. Sit back, relax, and chat. That felt like the most informative yet most all over the place intro I've ever done. So hopefully it made sense to everybody. Anyway, Brandon AIYUK has been. I feel like we have to start a hashtag AIYUK watch, like we had hashtag Rogers watch a few off seasons ago. Like we're almost at that point.
But like this one is not as exciting. Like
No,
the
it's really
update
not.
is like there's no update. Where he's still holding in. They're still not. He might get traded. He might take their deal. We don't know.
They had another meeting. They said it kind of went well, but they still have to work out things. Like it's literally is no update, but like we're getting close. Like I feel like peak draft season starts this weekend, and it'd be really nice to know before that. And I don't know if we're going to.
Hey, it definitely is, and it could have major impacts on the Couch GMs World Cup, which drafts this Sunday.
Yes, it does. So also keep an eye out. We're gonna probably have some draft feedback in next week's episode. Well, we also talk about tight ends, today's wide receivers, but I feel like we are really in a push AIYUK down your rankings a little bit while we wait. And I know we're talking about wide receivers later, but I don't think he's going to be in any of our top 10. So I think we can dive a little bit right now.
Yeah, I think you're kind of viewing him almost, even if he does play week one, which he probably will, but when you start to talk about all the time missed at camp, the conditioning, like you almost start thinking as a guy that's going to start the season on PUP or, with the new IR rules, you can designate, I believe, 2 players on the initial 53 countdown day that they can be placed on IR and still return. In previous years, they had to make it through the initial cutdown day. That's why you always saw someone make it the 53 and then the next day get placed on IR, and they can do that. And they'll come back in a couple weeks. And I think that's kind of how you have to view him. And that make me hard because you're going to draft him in those top 5 rounds when you're trying to find starters. But AIYUK is a guy that, might not start to return the investment until week 4, week 5, maybe even later, especially if he goes to a new team. That could complicate things even more.
And it seems like if he's going to go to a new team, the answer is the Steelers. So, like, he's more than likely going to be a number 1 worse number 2 option on that team. Like, it's going to be him and George Pickens. They don't really have running backs that really, like, oh my gosh, you have to, consider them. Like, they're good, but it's going to be a good situation for him. But I will say, like, he's borderline top 10 wide receiver on some rankings when you're expecting him to just either come back and play for San Fran or be ready and up to speed week 1. I had him fall to being a flex spot pick for me in a draft we had this past weekend. And even then, I was like, pick 36. I don't know if I really want to take Brandon AIYUK. The value's there, but it's amazing how him and Debo have basically flipped. And everyone was like, this is Brandon AIYUK's year to be the guy. And Debo's right back up in that spot now because it's a lot more of a stable situation.
Yeah, and the draft that you had this weekend, there were some questionable drafters too. So that also helped push them down. But it's going to be tough, not knowing going into these draft seasons and stuff like that. So you just mentioned pick 36 and you still weren't comfortable. But if you want to say if he stays with San Fran, you feel better, which we won't know at the time. But like, where is that range for him that you're like, okay, I'm comfortable with this pick? Does it depend on how you draft early? Like if you take a running back earlier, let's say not his partner, Christian, let's say Brees Hall, and then so you get your solid running back, you take another wide receiver. If he's going to be your wide receiver 2 with a star running back, do you feel better? Like, do you like him in a no running back strategy as wide receiver 3? Like, what is your thoughts there?
I think as 4th round pick at the best, like in this situation, I went Jamar Chase and then Kyron Williams. So I felt comfortable at those wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 spots. Came back with Nico Collins. I'm like, definitely wide receiver 3, Brandon Ayuk. Like the upside's there. You know he's going to play. Like it's not really as bad as some of these situations we've heard like guys in legal trouble before where it's like, do you really want to even take him in round 7? Like you're going to get production. So I don't think you really have to push him too far down. I like him as a flex. If you're going to go 2 running backs and then have him as your wide receiver 2, I think that's fine. Picking him in round 3 as of now is a tough sell to me, but I wouldn't blame anyone for doing it either. So I'm thinking round 4 at the earliest is my sweet spot. If he falls to round 5, the value's definitely there.
Awesome. Think you answered all my questions about Brandon Ayuk. Stay tuned for next week for no update, but we'll have one.
We'll have a fake update. We have some actual updates at the quarterback position as Washington, Denver, and Las Vegas named starters. Washington, not shockingly, going with rookie Jaden Daniels, who has looked impressive and I think is going to make things interesting there in Washington. Denver going with Bo Nix. They're going to start with the future and see if he can develop as he plays. And Vegas with Gardner Minshew, which is the choice I was hoping they were going to make because, man, I mean, he might not be a top half of the league starter even, but he's got the spirit and the work to go out there and win some games, and he's going to make it at least fun for Vegas.
Yeah, I really am glad that Gardner Minshew got the job, and I think we'll talk about the upsides of that when we get into our wide receiver rankings because I believe there is one Raiders wide receiver, which you probably know his name, that is on all our top tens, but that is as much as I'll say about that right now. And then Bo Nix, I mean, he was the last of the quarterbacks drafted in the first round this past year when we had the all he started with uh, Caleb, then you had Jaden, Drake May, JJ, unfortunately out for the season. We talked about that last week. And then Bo Nix went in the first round. And then we waited forever for another quarterback to go. But Bo Nix has that, all that starting experience in the college rank. So he has a lot of experience starting. He's played in big games. He might not have that high upside as someone like Caleb Williams, but for someone like Sean Payton, who is a very quarterback friendly system, I want you to do this, you do this. Bo Nix fits there nicely. And not saying Denver's going to make some noise. I still think they're a couple pieces away. But, I don't see them getting blown out 77-3 or whatever that game was last year either.
That Dolphins game was insane. Do you think I don't think it really moves the needle because there wasn't really an option in Denver. Does this help any pass catchers move anywhere onto your radar? Or are they still all late round flyers? Example like Cortland Sutton.
Yeah, I don't think it doesn't move the needle enough for fantasy because I still have, questions about that. I've always liked Cortland Sutton. I've always thought he was an underrated wide receiver. So he was a guy I would take a late round flyer on in the past, and it has definitely burned me. But I would probably still do it again. It's just a guy I've always liked, and think maybe he could succeed with a guy that's going to get him the ball. But to your point, late round flyer, there isn't the dominant. This isn't the Demario Thomas, rest in peace, Emmanuel Sanders, Broncos, the Brandon Marshall Broncos wide receiver that you want. So late round, similar to like the Steelers running backs. Like, which one do you want, Najee or Jalen Warren? You take them late and hope.
And then one person who is probably number 2 on the wide receivers I can't stand to own list, Terry McLaurin. So Jaden Daniels has been getting a lot of hype, and it seems like Washington's offense could have some explosion this year. And Terry McLaurin is probably being drafted the lowest he's been in his entire career. Does Jaden Daniels being locked in there and hearing some of this hype make you want to target Terry McLaurin at this value pick?
So I don't have the numbers in front of me. I should probably have pulled that up before the show, but I think he's going similar to where Brandon Ayuk is going right now. So since we talked about him, which one would you rather have?
No, I mean, I have bias.
Yes,
So part of
you
me
mentioned
would still want Brandon Ayuk, but this is probably the most excited that I've been for
McLaurin.
Terry McLaurin.
So how about McLaurin or Mike Evans? I feel like Mike Evans
And
is a little more.
actually, when I look at it, I mean, I don't know if the Brandon Ayuk, I don't think he's really fallen as far down ADPs as like we're talking about, but as of now, Terry McLaurin's ADP is actually more similar to Zay Flowers, T. Higgins, Tank Dell. So that's another round below where we're talking. That's in the 40s to 50s.
Yeah, I would take him over all those guys as well. Yeah, you're right. The ADPs though are probably not up to date with the because of how early drafts had started and AIYUK was knowing that top 10 consideration. He would take a while for him to drop, but that's stuff you see too when you're looking online and you're seeing ADPs or things change. Look 2 years ago at Damian Pierce. 2 weeks before the draft, he was going to like round 10. In peak draft week, he was middle of the second round. You had to take him if you wanted him.
Yeah, I remember one of my earlier drafts. I took him in round 8, and then literally he did go in round 2. It's not going to happen with something like that, but I'm just saying the value of Terry McLaurin, I feel like hasn't been in their past because, like, obviously he's been a solid player and he's, demanded a top 3 round pick in some years at least. And then last year was a very big struggle, and all of a sudden now you see a light at the end of the tunnel, and he's at his lowest ADP of his career. So I just wanted to bring him up and see what you thought.
No, I like the especially if if you end up taking a tight end like a Travis Kelsey, Sam Laporta, Trey McBride, or you go high for a quarterback with Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson or Jalen Hurts. You know, it's always at a cost of some positions, and being able to get a wide receiver later, like a Terry McLaurin, might make one of those decisions more appetizing or an easier pill to swallow.
Cool. And then Cody, I know you had a fan question come in. I will let you ask it.
Yeah, so and I'm gonna have some follow ups to it.
Okay.
And I have some information if you need it. I'll try to answer it the best. But fan question came in, and we're talking draft rankings, and predominantly in fantasy football, you focus on the offense. But someone reached out and was like, "Hey, I'm for the first time in quite a while, I'm doing a IDP, which is an individual defensive player. That's what that stands for. Redraft league this year. It is 26 rounds. At what round do you start considering defensive players?"
So I will say I was in a league probably similar to the one that he's talking about here, except mine was a keeper. So there was a little bit of a different situation with like keepers being kept in similar rounds to where they were drafted before, whatever. But the earliest I ever remember debating a defensive player was round 9. Normally probably closer to 10 or 11. And I mean, at that point, you're trying to find linebackers who are crazy to league leading tacklers. Like maybe you don't consider them the best players, but like Blake Martinez back in the day was someone who I was always trying to target pretty early in IDP drafts because he had 150 tackles a year. Like those guys that are going to go out there and put a ton of stats up are what I would look at there. But honestly, kind of run your draft the way you would normally run your draft for the most part. And then when you start getting to the point where you're thinking about my late round flyers at wide receiver and running back, that's when you start trying to think about defenders.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. And I think too, you're going to have to fight the urge to it's going to be round 13 and a bunch of defenders are gone and the guy that you thought about taking in round 9 is still there. And you have to remember you have to fill out that defensive team as well. So don't forget those guys. And then my follow-up question, which you kind of hinted at, the players that you're looking at in IDP. You mentioned lots of tackles. Round 9, round 10, you're also looking at your TJ Watts, your Micah Parsons, your 15 plus sack guys. Um, and then tacklers.
Mhm.
How do you rank that? Do you still look at linebackers that are tacklers more than sack guys? What is your overall thoughts on rank in a real short ranking the defensive positions?
Well, so what I've learned in my little bit of playing IDP, it seems like depending on scoring, it's kind of hard to answer this. In general, linebacker is the deepest position. So while you have your linebackers that are like going to be the standouts, you can almost definitely find a linebacker that's going to be decent later. Um, so I kind of like targeting defensive linemen first. If you end up being in one of those leagues that has a split between defensive tackle and defensive end, defensive tackles are hard to find for fantasy. Cody and I are in a dynasty league that separates defensive ends and defensive tackles are impossible sometimes. But so I
Mhm.
like targeting that and safeties and corners first. Sometimes that's just defensive back. Sometimes those are split as well. And then the things I'm looking for besides tackles, guys who get interceptions, year after year. So obviously Jerron Bland, somebody that's going to be high on people's radars this year. Obviously, we hope he does it again, but people like that and sacks, like Cody said, your edge rushers that are perennial 10 sack a year guys are going to be near the top of your list.
Perfect. Yeah, and I did ask that question about the defensive lines. It's 4 defensive players, just defense, and then you have to start 2 DBs and 2 defensive linemen, which can be D tackles or uh, defensive ends,
So
which is
no specific linebackers, just
correct.
D
Just
line, DB, and then defensive flex.
which I would imagine is because it's so complicated now with defensive end versus outside linebacker with so many 4-3s versus 3-4s. So
Mm-hmm.
I would imagine all the defensive ends are more considered linebackers than and you'll still have a couple like a Nick Bosa, he's still a defensive lineman, a
Yeah.
Joey Bosa, he's still a defensive lineman, but you get the point there. And then the one thing I did want to mention, if you are playing IDP, which I definitely think you should try out, it definitely makes fantasy a whole lot different. Maybe not your main league, but even if you just join a free league to give it a shot, I definitely recommend it. You mentioned DBs and safeties. A lot of times you have to look at number 2 cornerbacks because they don't get as many. It's still a game of opportunities. You
Yes.
know, Darius Slay, Jair Alexander, Jalen Ramsey. Yeah, they might get a couple picks, but they're only getting 3 or 4 opportunities a game to make an interception or make a tackle. So you're going to want to avoid the big name cornerbacks and let those other guys that aren't as locked in as you, like listening to the Couch GMs podcast, take those starters and get less points each week because you were the wiser one.
That is actually a really good piece of advice there. Safeties are a little different because they're kind of, involved in the run game and such, but cornerback twos are very valuable at cornerback. That's a great, great piece of advice.
All right, that's probably the most defensive fantasy talk we've talked in a long time. And
Yeah.
so we don't have a bumper, so I'm going to ask you to hum it, but let's talk some top wide receivers.
Dun, 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 dun. All right, cool. Top 10 wide receivers. One of these weeks, we're going to get a top 10 bumper now that we have one episode left after this week of our top 10 series. But wide receivers, Tyler obviously not here, but he did give us his top 10. So we're going to go 1 to 10, I believe, like how we did last week. And we can just jump right into number 1, 3, 2, 1.
Tyreek Hill.
Tyreek Hill. And that's because all of us have Tyreek Hill. And that's because Tyreek Hill is pretty much right now the consensus number 1 pick in fantasy. The only other person I've seen go number 1 is Christian McCaffrey, and I understand that one as well. Is there anyone even is there a reason why you would take one over the other?
Between McCaffrey or
Between McCaffrey and Tyreek Hill. I think that's the real conversation with Tyreek Hill. Like we
oh,
know Tyreek Hill's perennial is number 1 wide receiver right now.
so don't hear what I'm not saying. If you want to take Tyreek Hill over Christian McCaffrey, do it. For me, the talent gap between Christian McCaffrey and the next guys makes it worth taking him as the number 1, pick. I would take him for sure. You see it.
Okay.
The other running backs are going back half of round 1. There's a lot of other wide receivers we're going to talk about that 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 for me can be swapped in pretty much any order. I like Hill the most because I think he's going to be the most consistent. He's in the highest flying offense. But if you want to tell me you want to take 2 of the next 5 guys above Hill, you can convince me of that. So for me, it's CMC is my clear 101 pick.
So CMC has basically reached Travis Kelce status, where we used to take Travis Kelce in the first round because there was nobody else on his level. That makes sense.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I was when we did the running back show last week, I really was in on Breece Hall, and I really like the potential of Bijan Robinson in this upcoming season with an actual quarterback and being more a part of the offense passing game. But I think we've seen McCaffrey is and honestly, there's probably going to be some regression too from, the 16 straight weeks of a touchdown.
Are you
Like
sure?
that's probably not going to happen again this year. He's getting a little bit older, but because of the value of running backs and just wide receivers, a deeper position in general, that I would rather take McCaffrey as the 101. And for full transparency, we've talked about the draft that me and you had this past weekend. Then in our league of record, we do some random draft lottery based on the last year, and then how you get picked, and then you get to pick your spot. And I waited to see because I had the second pick. And if I was going to get CMC, I didn't want 2 leagues with CMC. So once I knew I wasn't getting CMC because he went first in that league as well, I was like, all right, I'll take the number 1 pick and I'll get CMC. So I didn't tell George that. He's learning about that right now. But that was my thought process behind holding out on why I wouldn't say what pick I was going to take.
We also had a slow draft for a dynasty this week that somebody literally took 23 hours to make a pick. And then Cody in the same weekend took 28 hours to pick a draft spot. So it was just frustrating in general. I hope you understand that.
But all draft season is here, and we're so happy.
Yes, it is, for sure. Number 2, where it gets slightly more interesting, I guess. Are you ready, Cody?
Yes.
1, 2, 3.
CeeDee Lamb.
Ja'Marr Chase. Tyler also has Ja'Marr Chase. Chase and Lamb probably pretty interchangeable here. It's interesting because normally I'm the person that plays fantasy with maybe a little too much emotion. And I was kind of burned by Ja'Marr Chase last year, not really by the fault of Ja'Marr Chase, but by Joe Burrow getting hurt. And I was in a situation in our league of record where I took him over CMC because I already had CMC in 3 other leagues. Turns out I wanted him in 4. So don't ever think about that when you're doing fantasy drafts. Just learn the lesson from me right here. Ja'Marr Chase, nothing's really changed. Hopefully Joe Burrow is back to 100%. I think everything is proven that he has so far, and he stays on the field, and they go back to chasing down the Chiefs like they have been.
So, and don't get me wrong.
No pun intended.
I'm going to throw in Ja'Marr Chase because he's my number 3. Lamb's your number 3. We can tell Tyler's next, but I think you hit it. These are the coin flips. But is it interesting at all to you? Like, I'm starting to feel a little two-faced. Like, Ja'Marr Chase really hasn't practiced at all because he's, wants a contract. CeeDee Lamb has barely practiced, kind of just doing walkthrough stuff because he wants a new contract. And we're still like, they're the top 2 guys after Tyreek Hill. But Brandon Ayuk, it's like, whoa. Is it just because that they're going to produce on the field? They've at least been around the team somewhat. Like, what is your, like, I think Chase missed all of last week. Like, there's a lot of, what's the difference, I guess, is the question between these 2 and a Brandon Ayuk.
Well, the only other real extra layer that you didn't mention there is Ayuk might not even be on the same team week 1. He might be learning an entirely new offense. Lamb and Chase are going to be on the team that they're on week 1. And I think with Ayuk being a little bit more of a wild card, knowing how he has held out before, he's requested trades before, I feel like if you had to tell me out of Lamb, Chase, and Ayuk, who is most likely to sit out week 1 for a contract, the answer is Ayuk. I don't think the other 2 would. Lamb is going to wait to the last possible second to get into the facility, I think, because he's going to show I'm angry with Dallas, but he's not going to miss a game. And I think Chase already being there already gives him a leg up on Ayuk too. So I think that's what it is.
And I do think too that they have both proven that they are.
They have both been better than Ayuk has. You're
right. Yes, exactly. I'm so sorry. But yes. And then just for clarity, I have Hill, Lamb, Chase. George has Hill, Chase, Lamb. Tyler, though, has Hill, Chase, Amon-Ra. Wish he was here to talk about that.
Yeah. I mean, I can't even say it's that ridiculous.
Oh, it's not.
But Amon-Ra St. Brown is still on the rise in his career. He's only in year 3. He had a great year last year. The Lions themselves are also now a big contender. So, I mean, it makes sense that you have their wide receiver 1 this high in the rankings. Maybe 3 is a little rich for both of us, but it's not crazy.
I think, and I don't know, I didn't ask him, but I think the reason he's there is I mentioned 1 through 5 on my list. You can convince me to put in any spot. And I think Amon-Ra might be the safest pick of any of them, but have the least ceiling. Like, like Amon-Ra is going to get you 12 to 18 points every week. Do I see Amon-Ra ever getting a 30-point week? Unless he gets 3 touchdowns, probably not. These other guys,
he gets like 1 or 2 a year, but not as much as these other guys.
Right. These other guys, like, they're going to put up the points. Amon-Ra is that safe guy. And really, we're giving him a hard time. He's not here, but 3 for Amon-Ra is not bad at all.
And then we can go right into number 4, Cody, in 3, 2, 1.
Justin
St.
Jefferson.
Brown.
So
So I
he's
have
still
him right
really
there at 4.
I have Justin Jefferson, the top wide receiver last year. Yeah, he's coming off some injuries. I know they don't have JJ McCarthy, but he is just too good to like over. It's kind of one of those things where like he's slipping, and at some point you're like, bruh, this is Justin Jefferson. Just take him.
Exactly. He's one of the few wide receivers in the league that are quarterback proof. Like, you talked about some of the quarterbacks A.J. Brown played with when he was dealing with injuries in Tennessee. You talk about going way back to, like, who the heck did Calvin Johnson ever play with back when he was playing? Didn't matter. He was Calvin Johnson. Like, Justin Jefferson is on that level for fantasy where he's
You
still
play
going to
with
get
Matt
his.
Stafford, so I'm a little offended by that comment.
You're right. Matt Stafford never missed time because Matt Stafford was the dude who scored a touchdown with broken ribs to win a game. You're right.
Yep. And then Tyler had CeeDee Lamb, so same thing.
It
Just
might be a contract thing with CD Lamb and putting Amra over him when you look at his rankings in a whole there.
could be. I mean, I feel like if you were going to do that, you would put Amra above Chase, though, too. But
Fair.
all right, number 5.
All right, 3, 2, 1. Justin
Amra.
Jefferson.
Tyler says Justin Jefferson. We've
So
hit this.
there's your 5. We all
Yes.
have the same top 5, but in different orders. Not a
And
hit at Justin Jefferson at 5 for me. I just am an Amra St. Brown fan. And then
you,
Cody, you're going to be
you
like,
watch
nothing
receiver.
wrong there. You're just a Jefferson fan.
I guess he was also on receiver, so that did not make a ton of sense. But yeah, and I think too, I mentioned CMC as my clear 101. I would take all 5 of these guys next. That's how I would start the next draft. And then to throw it
So
back to last
weird
week,
being in a
I would
fantasy
go,
draft where that happens with no running backs in the top 6 besides CMC.
and then it's Bijan and Brees, and then the draft for me really starts getting wild. Though for me, that's how I would do it. And if you're one of those later picks and one of those guys fall, you jump on that all day, every day.
All right, so the real draft starts at number 6, at least wide receiver 6. Here we go, Cody. 3, 2, 1.
Garrett
AJ
Wilson.
Brown. Garrett Wilson really did start to explode at the end of last year, but I think the fact that I haven't seen him with Rodgers is why I don't have him at 6, but I get why you do.
Yeah, I mean, he was a top 10 with Zach Wilson. He's knock on wood going to get a healthy Rodgers. Like,
For at least 2 plays.
yeah, 5. He'll do more than last year for
Oh,
sure.
okay, good.
But yeah, Garrett Wilson, I just think he has the talent. And even last year, when he struggled with whatever quarterback they were playing with, he was still a guy that could take a 10-yard slant, 70 yards to the house. Like, he still has that in ability in for him too. And similar to my top 5, these next 5 that we're about to name, sure, we could probably switch them. Maybe it's the next 4, but would be my next tier. But those are kind of where I'm at. And Tyler took AJ as well, so you can talk on him.
That's a little bit of a homer pick, but we're not going to talk about that. Yeah,
Okay.
I know. I get it because that's actually a homer pick for me. But no, I mean, AJ is one of those guys who's always just going to produce. He obviously is a little bit more high variance. There were a couple games last year where he kind of disappeared, but I expect the Eagles offense to look a little bit more coherent than they did last season. So I have no problems with expecting AJ Brown to just be someone who delivers every single week.
Yeah, and it's not, I don't think you should be too worried about Devonta Smith. Obviously, some weeks it'll be where he catches the 2 touchdowns and AJ Brown only gets 80 yards and 6 catches. Like, there'll be weeks like that,
Mhm.
but they're both still going to put up points. So even getting Devonta Smith later, it's still an offense you want to be a part of.
And there's been a lot of guys that have had success in this offense, meaning Kellen Moore's offense, because they now have the new scheme with the new offensive coordinator. And it seems like so far, Jalen Hurts has been very comfortable with it in camp. So I like the rebound effect there for the Eagles in general. Going on to number 7 in 3, 2, 1. Puka
AJ Brown.
Nacua.
Tyler has Garrett Wilson, so me and him are flipped. I agree with everything you said on AJ Brown. So just talk Puka.
Just talk Puka. Now, every time I look at this, I'm like, Man, that's very rich for Puka Nacua because he only had 1 year. It was only his rookie year, obviously, and there's still Cooper Kupp kinda lingering back there in that offense, and did they overperform last year, or is this how they're supposed to be? When it comes to that last question, I think that's how they were supposed to be. This is a Sean McVay coach team. They kinda had a little bit of a mini retool, but they're back. Um, but I think I just like the ceiling of Puka, knowing that he can do it again or even get better more than some of these guys that I have right below him. Because I think once you get out of that first tier, or like maybe now we're even into a second tier, like there's a lot of solid wide receivers, but no one that I look at and I'm like, that's 20 points every single week. So at that point, I kind of like the ceiling of where Puka is, even though there's a lot of question marks.
Yeah, and even if you're, worried about Cooper Cup coming down a little bit, Puka coming down, that is, like, he's at this point too where you're kind of at the turn, maybe the start of the second round, and you could pair him with one of these guys. Like, if you could get a Garrett Wilson and Puka Nakua on the turn, like that, for me, that's great. Like, I know some
Go
people
zero
got,
running back at that point because there's a lot less running backs going high.
yeah, I mean, because after if you missed out on Bijan and Brees Hall, like I would personally go no running back at that point. I would get me two solid wide receivers and Puka Nakua. I think, especially as a wide receiver too, with that upside and that potential, could be deadly.
That's something that I think I'm going to be keeping an eye on as I have a late pick coming up in the draft and stuff, just to see where those three like I should say that running backs 2 and 3 go, and what a zero running back strategy looks like. But I like the idea of pairing two of these top wide receivers together because that's, even though I've been the person that's been against that, that's been a winning strategy in fantasy for a few years now.
That's my go-to.
Mr. Wide Receiver himself over there, that cheesehead Cody guy that's sitting next to me. Number 8, 3, 2, 1, Garrett
Puka.
Wilson. So Cody's got Puka here. I have Garrett Wilson all the way down here. And I think, like I said, when you talked about him, um, I think it has a lot to do with just the fact I haven't seen him with Rodgers, but I still have him as a top 10 wide receiver. It'd be ridiculous to drop him any lower than this.
Yeah, and Tyler has Devontae Adams, so that's the first appearance for him on the list. Um, let's just go into 9 because I have
Yep.
Adams too.
Yep. You have Adams. I have Marvin Harrison here. And again, I think that's an upside pick. And I think a lot of people kind of give him the name's Marvin Harrison. People are going to be like, this guy is the next big thing. And obviously he's a rookie. We don't know that. But also, Kyler Murray being back, even playing half the season last year and now having a full off season to get back up to speed. Kyler Murray was a top 10 quarterback in this league. And a lot of people really wrote him and the Cardinals off because of that injury that made him miss half or more of last year. The Cardinals have a chance with now a solid wide receiver one to jump right back up and be competitive. And that a lot of that's going to have to do with Marvin Harrison. The ceiling is huge.
Yeah, I have Devontae Adams at 9. Tyler has Chris Olave, the only one of us three having Chris Olave on there. So he's an Olave fan. Too bad he's not here to defend that pick because I don't like that one at all. But Devontae Adams, we mentioned Gardner Minshew got the starting job. I think he's going to use him, pass the ball around him. I know there's a lot of people that are, still talking about the potential Devontae Adams trade or the trade deadline if the Raiders slow, and that could play into it. But if he's getting traded, he's going to the Jets. So like then he goes with Aaron Rodgers, and that's an upgrade as well. And you've seen what he's done with them. So I don't expect that to happen. Let's make that very clear. I think he's gonna be a Raider all season long, and I like him with Gardner Minshew, and he's gonna get his. He's gonna still get his targets, get his catches, and he's still, maybe not in fantasy, but in terms of actual wide receivers, he's still a top 3 wide receiver, if not the top wide receiver when you put the whole wide receiver package together.
Definitely. And I just want to defend the Chris Olave at 9 for Tyler a little bit. I think nine's a little rich, but he was a top 20 wide receiver last year. He had 1,100 yards. He finished as wide receiver 19 in half PPR. And now you're looking at it, and he's going to have the best quarterback situation he's had in his entire career. Number one, if you look at the trajectory of most wide receivers, year 3, year 4, and year
Are you
5
talking
are
about
some
Chris
of
Olave?
their, yeah,
My bro had Derek Carr last year.
for like 4 weeks, and then they just he was like hurt and beat up the entire time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm not vibing with your stepping in, man.
Yes, he had Derek Carr, but Derek Carr was a shell of himself for a while. The year before that, he had Andy Dalton and Jameis Winston, but they didn't really play Jameis Winston. I still think Kirk Cousins is the best quarterback situation he's had in his entire career. And he's coming into year 3
He doesn't
and
have Kirk
years
Cousins.
3,
He has
4,
Derek Carr.
5.
Chris Olave has Derek Carr.
Yes. I'm thinking about Drake London. Never mind me.
Actually, I was like, bro, what do you mean he had Derek Carr last?
He had Derek Carr last year. He has Derek Carr this year. I'm lost apparently. Hopefully Derek Carr stays healthy.
Yeah, I would take Drake London over Chris Olave if that.
That's a bold strategy, I think. I don't know why everyone's so high on Drake London. I get that, but like,
I'm not high on him, but he is currently getting drafted higher than Chris Olave.
Yeah.
But there is a clear tier break, I think, after the top 10 too. Like when you get to your Drake London, your Chris Olaves, your Debo, your Nikos, your Mike Evans, and then you start to get your guys back in there like a Devontae Smith and Jalen Waddle. Like, I think we talked about this off air before we started. Like, there's a clear 10 wide receivers that you want, and then it's like,
and Chris Olave apparently.
Maybe we're gonna have the wide receiver dartboard this year with the random wide receiver we like. And it's just like Drake London you like because you have high expectations for the offense, but there's more mouths to feed. Chris Olave, maybe you think he is ready to be that number 1 wide receiver with Derek Carr, and maybe he is, maybe he's not.
I don't know. I'm kind of thrown off because
you were about to go on it.
Yeah, I was about to go on a whole tangent. He should have let me do it and then just been like, you're wrong.
Anyway. I didn't want to sound even more dumb.
Yeah, thank you. Number 10, last one on the list. 3, 2, 1.
Marvin Harrison.
Devontae Adams. So Adams and Harrison just flipped there. And yeah, Tyler does have Marvin Harrison. So the only person he doesn't have in here that we do is Puka, which is surprising. He's got Olave, but he does not have Puka on there.
Yep, and George and I have the same top 10, just different orders, like we've mentioned numerous times. And I would definitely take Puka over Chris Olave, obviously by my rankings, but definitely some people are high on others. Like George is not going to take Amari Cooper even in the 10th round. He's just not.
He's someone that fell really far in that draft this weekend too. I don't understand. I have one question for you.
Okay.
That's really interesting because it does involve 1 or 2 fringe guys. In Houston, I think we kind of had this discussion too when we did a mock draft earlier. Who's your wide receiver in Houston? Because they have Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs, and Tank Dell. So Nico Collins, about wide receiver 14 in ADP. Stephon Diggs, 21. And then Tank Dell, wide receiver 29. Looking at Tank Dell in round 6 to 7. Stephon Diggs is around round 4 to 5. And then Nico Collins, round 3. Who do you like?
I like Nico Collins.
So you like spending up for the wide receiver in this case?
Hang on. I was going to say, I like him the most out of all the wide receivers. Like, I think he's going to have the best season. But because there's so many mouths to feed, I think Stephon Diggs might still be the best value.
My answer is actually going with the value in Tank Dell because I think Tank Dell has one of the bigger ceilings if he just continues the trajectory he was on last year, and the fact that you have a chance to get him around 6 or 7. He's actually my favorite of that group. And that might also be me thinking Nico Collins was a bit of a flash in the pan. Not saying he's going to be bad, but like, I don't know if I look at Nico Collins, I'm like, number 1 wide receiver when you're looking at all the other options in that offense, as opposed to like how you can look at Devontae Adams when he was still with a couple other guys there in Vegas or that kind of, you know what I mean? Like there's so many big names around him. I don't know if I've really like Nico Collins screams the guy to me.
Yeah. And I honestly, you could be, previous draft biased. I really liked him coming out of college when he was coming out of Michigan. Like I've liked his progression and his growth, and I think he's developed into a number 1 wide receiver. I think if they didn't value him, they wouldn't have renegotiated Stephon Diggs' deal to only give him a 1-year deal. And also, for all this talk of the Houston Texans, I think because the lasting impression, not their lasting, but the impression people remember the most is that Browns game where they just came out and dominated. Like, this was a very average offense last year. Like, it would have some spurts. CJ Stroud was very efficient in not turning the ball over, but it was not an efficient offense as a whole. They went through their growing pains. And like, there's a part of me that is like not buying into all the Texans hype. Like, just because of what that last, that Browns game did for them. I still think they're going to be very good. I think they're still probably going to win the AFC East. No, South. Wow, not the East. That'd be impressive if they won the East, but that's a different topic for a different day. But I think, see who else is around those guys and maybe take a guy that, has more guaranteed opportunity. Nothing's guaranteed, but in over those Texans wide receivers, and you might be a little disappointed.
So do you like Chris Olave better than Nico Collins? Since you were downplaying him. Mike Evans?
I would probably take Nico over Mike Evans just because Mike Evans, I've never liked Mike Evans' consistency. Outside of that 1 year with Tom Brady, he's always been big week, little week, little week, big week, little week, big week. Like, I feel like that's always been his MO.
Yeah.
So I've tried to avoid him a lot. So I would take Nico in that instance. But some other guys I'm seeing around there, like let's see, Drake London, I'd probably take over Nico Collins. Brandon AIYUK, that's a good one. We've talked about that. I'd probably take him over Nico Collins. And that's someone that likes Nico Collins too. So,
and that's pushing Brandon AIYUK right now.
Right.
That's interesting. So you do not like Nico Collins in general at his current draft value, but you like him as a whole.
Yes. I like, if you told, like, I still think at the end of the year, when you look at all the stats, that Nico Collins will be top in targets, top in catches, top in yards. Maybe not top in touchdowns because that's high variance.
Yeah.
But when you look at where Stephon Diggs is, the numbers are going to be close, and you got him a round and a half later. Similar to like Tank Dell, he might not have the catches, but his yards might be up there, and you got him 2 rounds later.
I like it. So while we're talking about value over, whatever, I have a feeling that this is another reason why Tyler didn't have Puka Nacua on his top 10. How much do you like Cooper Kupp's value going in the 4th round compared to taking Puka Nacua in probably early round 2?
I love Cooper Kupp. I know the injuries are scary, but even with even when they were both healthy last year, they were both putting up numbers. That's why, like, I wanted so hard to not put Puka in my top 10 because I'm like, it was one season, 5th round pick. But like, what he did that with, a third of the season to almost a half of a season with Cooper Kupp still putting up good numbers. Like, so I would take Cooper Kupp. Matt Stafford can handle 2 elite wide receivers in fantasy football.
I like it. I also like Cooper Kupp's value. And I mean, I talked about the ceiling on Puka, and I would not shy away from taking him if it fell kind of that way on the draft board. But if it didn't, and I don't have him on my team, Cooper Kupp, someone I'm kind of like going out there trying to target in that 4th round area because of that upside. So I'm with you on that one.
I'm taking Cooper, especially if like you get the Breece Hall or Bijan Robinson. Like, give me a high flyer on like a Marvin Harrison on the turn, and then give me a solid, more safe one, even if it's the end, because that's the end of round 3 at that point. I would maybe go a little early for Cooper Kupp. If you tell me I walk out of a draft with Breece Hall, Marvin Harris, Cooper Kupp in a 10 or 12 man league, I am feeling ecstatic.
Yeah, because I mean, people going around Cooper Kupp, the other clear-cut number 1 wide receiver is DK Metcalf. I don't know about you. DK Metcalf just doesn't really move the needle for me.
Yeah, he reminds me a lot of Mike Evans. Like, it's the consistency. Like, DK is a great wide receiver. Don't get me wrong, but it's the consistency that concerns me.
Yes, and then Jalen Waddle, who's another wide receiver too. Michael Pittman, who I love Michael Pittman, but I like Cooper Kupp more. Stephon Diggs, the Houston situation, we talked about it. DJ Moore is kind of in a situation we don't know if he's going to be 1 or 2, and Devontae Smith is wide receiver 2. So when you're looking at it, like, I like Cooper Kupp in that group of players because I think there's guaranteed production as opposed to like some wide receiver 2s are going to be more inconsistent, or some wide receiver 1s who like are good, but they're not the game-changing wide receiver ones we see earlier in the draft.
And I would put DJ Moore up with there too, with like what he did, that his points with Justin Fields last year. He got a much better passer, whether you think Kalen is going to be good or not. Uh, you know, Keenan Allen, older, he's stayed healthy, but he was banged up a lot last year. There's some talks of him putting on maybe some potential extra weight over this offseason. Just some Twitter stuff. I didn't validate that, so take that with a grain of salt. And then Rome Odunze, who was my favorite wide receiver coming out. Like, I think he's going to be good, but I think he's going to take time to really develop into an elite guy. So I like DJ Moore too, in that mindset.
And I think the Chicago wide receivers scare me. I mean, rookie quarterback, you don't really know what you're going to get, but the Houston wide receivers I like better because you're in a second year of the quarterback. You've kind of seen it before, as opposed to the Chicago wide receivers. You're like, they're Chicago and
they have a track record of bad quarterback rookie play.
Yes, exactly.
Bad quarterback play in general. Let's not even take the rookies out of it.
Exactly. So that's why I think take DJ Moore, have that concern, add in a couple potential targets. That's why I'm a little lower on DJ Moore than you are.
Cool.
Anyone else that you want to talk about? I'm going to beat you to it. Anyone else that you want to talk about at some point, whether it's late round flyers you like, other value picks, other comparisons, what do you got that you want to ask me?
I'm gonna talk 2 rookie names that, late round flyers outside of the big 3 that were drafted early. First one, Ladd McConkey, Chargers slot receiver. It's opportunity caught, not a lot of competition. It's still Justin Herbert, could be his go-to receiver. He's the guy I'm liking taking a flyer on. And then Adonai Mitchell, the rookie out of Texas, not the fast one, Xavier Worthy. He's still pretty fast though. But for the Colts, I like Michael Pittman a lot, but it does seem like Adonai and Anthony Richardson have started to develop a little bit of a chemistry there, and could start to overtake that. So maybe not like a week 1, super maybe, but like a hold and wait and see kind of guy with Adonai.
2 later guys that I like. I think I mentioned this when we were doing a mock draft as well. Jaden Reed. Because Green Bay's got a lot of wide receivers, and I think Jaden Reed has a chance to be the most consistent one of the group. And I think a lot of us are thinking Green Bay's going to be good this year. So I like going to get a piece of that offense at a value, and some probably like round 8 is where you'd be able to get Jaden Reed, 7, 8, something like that. And then a late round flyer, potential wide receiver 1, Keon Coleman in Buffalo, because we don't really know how the Buffalo wide receiver room is going to shake out. And you got Josh Allen there, who's definitely going to put up yards and points. So I like going to get a piece of that offense as well with a good value. So Keon Coleman.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of your Jaden Reed, great. I think what you should do, and it's easier if you're a Packers fan, but pick the guy and that's just going to be your Packers wide receiver, because they're all going pretty late. Whether you think it's going to be Christian Watson, who probably has the most high upside, but lacks some consistency. You have Jaden Reed, which George's point might be the most consistent, but will he ever get more than 6 catches in a game? Could be hard. My personal favorite right now for late round flyer is actually Romeo Doubs. He doesn't do anything like extremely well, but he's a very solid receiver. And I've always said, listen to quarterbacks when they talk. I made the jokes about when Josh Allen said he had Dawson Knox on his fantasy team. So I'm like, I'm taking Dawson Knox. And that was Dawson Knox's best year for fantasy. This past offseason, Jordan Love was on a podcast. I unfortunately can't remember. He was on a lot, but I can't remember the name of one I'm referencing. But he was asked to draw out his favorite play, and he draws out his favorite play, and they're like, all right, so who's running this route? And he goes, Tyreek Hill's running this route. Travis Kelce's running this route. I got Devontae Adams in the slot because his feet are nasty. Got my guy Josh Jacobs behind me. And an X running the fade, I got Romeo Doubs. So when he's picking out all the wide
one
receivers,
of these things is not like the other.
Except, but like, okay, that's a guy, to me, it might not. That's the guy I trust. That's the guy third down. That's the guy I'm throwing the fade balls to. So Romeo Doubs, I think, could be a sleeper in fantasy football. uh, this year, and a guy I'm targeting a lot in late rounds.
I have one more player I want to spotlight before we get out of here. Another probably even later round flyer. He's going below even Dontavian Wicks at this point in ADP. And I talked up his teammate earlier, Jahan Dotson. So if Washington's offense is going to take a step, you also got to think that's got to mean some good things for Jahan Dotson. He had a couple of good weeks last year. He was like on the waiver wire. So he's somebody I love taking in that like round 15, round 14, when you're right at the end of your draft, because he's another young guy that still has that upside. And I know Cody's definitely someone who's like, take the young wide receiver. He has more chance to break out. He still kind of fits that mold right now, and that offense could take a big step.
Yeah, my only concern is there has been some buzz coming out Washington, like that their wide receiver 2 battle is still completely open. They don't like it sounds like, he might be a little bit in the doghouse, similar to what happened to, ironically, Brandon Ayuk in his second
Hey,
year. This would be Jahan Dotson's third year, but like Brandon Ayuk had a pretty good rookie year and then was in like Kyle Shanahan's doghouse. Now he's about to get paid a boatload of money. So not saying things can't turn around, but that would be some concerns there. But you're talking your 15th pick. That's normally the guy that's first cut after someone breaks out on waivers. If they don't do well in week 2, the guy that you're taking instead of a kicker or a defense, so you can place someone on IR and get cheat the system, get an extra guy on your bench for first couple weeks. So I like those. But since you mentioned it, and there's a name that I see down there as well. If you're drafting early and we still don't have the name or the resolution for Brandon Ayuk, Ricky Pearsall, their first round wide receiver, maybe it was the beginning of the second. I can't remember exactly where he was drafted, but I know it was high. San Francisco wide receiver could place Brandon Ayuk. If he comes back, I'd cut him because that's what we're talking about right now. But if you're drafting this weekend, you still don't know what's going to happen with Brandon Ayuk. Maybe he's a guy to grab, even pair up with Brandon Ayuk if you think he's going to get traded. Kind of handcuff a wide receiver. You don't talk about that very often, but something potential to do there.
I like it, Cody. That's everyone I wanted to mention at the wide receiver position. Obviously, if you guys at home have any more questions about wide receivers, hit our DMs. We're always here to answer questions for you as we get into peak draft season.
I think that was the cue for me to start the meeting. What Khalil Shakir is going to do in Buffalo. Love to have those conversations. And if you want to, make sure you reach out to us on social media at the Couch GMs, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, X, TikTok, all those great places. A lot more content coming all season long, real soon. New stuff coming. Make sure you stay tuned for that. I'm Cody Roadcap. That's George Kerth, and we'll talk to you all next week.